The only time black men are allowed to speak is when it benefits others. So hey, this is your opportunity to speak. I want to hear from you. And if you want to make this voice louder and clearer, then what you need to do is contribute to the Cash App, the PayPal, and the Super Chat. I appreciate you. Hey, what's up, you guys? This is Dennis Sperling, and I want to talk to you guys about a story that's near and dear to my heart. This is a story, a tragedy, if you will, about attorney Alberta Odell Jones. A little bit about her. Well, let's pull up a photograph of this wonderful woman. She was an attorney. She was a Howard University graduate. She was a woman who met the end of her days in a horrific manner. And it's a story that I think that everybody should know about. This is a picture of Miss Jones. And, you know, I want you guys to understand that this woman was a trendsetter. This woman was the first prosecutor, the first black woman to pass the bar in the state of Kentucky, and the first prosecutor in Kentucky. So Alberta Odell Jones was born in Louisville, Kentucky, the third child of Sarah, Sadie Frances Crawford Jones, and Odell Jones. She was also the first cousin of Raymond Ponder. During her brief life, Alberta Jones was at the forefront of the change in Kentucky and Louisville. She was one of the first African-American women to pass the Kentucky bar in 1959 and the first woman prosecutor in 1964. Sally J. Seals White was the first African-American woman admitted to the Kentucky bar. Jones was a prosecutor in Louisville Domestic Relations Court. Her law office was located at 2018 Broadway. James A. Crumman, who we'll hear from later on, Sr., was the assistant prosecutor. Jones was also Cassius Clay, or Muhammad Ali's first attorney, and she took him to California to be trained under Archie Moore. Jones was also the civil rights activist, in addition to participating in the March on Washington and marches in Louisville. She rented voting machines and held classes to teach African Americans how to vote for candidates of their choice. She established the Independent Voters Association and was the active member of the Louisville Urban League and the NAACP. Jones also established the James Bulkey Welch Fund and held a fundraiser raffling off a car to pay Welch's medical bills and purchase the prosthetic arms to replace the ones young Welch had lost trying to retrieve his dog from under a train. Alberta was also a graduate of Louisville Central High School and attended the Louisville Municipal College for Negroes. When the college was merged with the University of Louisville, U of L, during desegregation, Jones continued her education at U of L and graduated third in her class. She was accepted into the University of Louisville Law School, but transferred after the first year to Howard University School of Law, where she graduated fourth in her class. A picture of Alberta O. Jones hangs in the U of L Law School. She was a member of the American Bar Association, Falls City Bar Association, the Louisville Bar Association, serving as secretary of the latter. She was also a member of the Zeta chapter of Zeta Phi Beta and the Sigma chapter of Iota Phi Lambda. Alberta O. Jones was murdered on August of 1965. The case has not been solved. This information was submitted by her niece. Now, more to her and her murder. It's what happened to her. And this is the sister right here. She was a Louisville native. Alberta Jones was an icon and a trailblazer. Yet sadly, in August of 1965, she also became a high-profile murder victim. I do believe that she was killed because of the work that she was involved in. Bellarmine University Professor Dr. Lee Remington told the I-Team. Beaten and left for dead, Jones was discovered in the Ohio River near the Old Fountain Ferry Museum Park. Her purse and shoes were missing, but found later near the Sherman-Minton Bridge. Those were discoveries which proved frustrating for investigators as the case was closed with no arrest. Years later, a photograph caught the attention of Remington, who was the first-year law student at the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law. Between classes, Remington stopped to take note of a group of people pictured on the wall. All of them were African-American pioneers in Kentucky law. All of them were men except one, Alberta Jones. And this is the photograph that they're referring to. I've always been interested in history and civil rights, and I remember being surprised that I'd never heard of her, Remington said. During the time when the university was still segregated, Jones graduated at the top of her class, the University of Louisville, and the same from law school at Howard University in Washington, D.C. This is her at Howard University in 1959. Jones went on to become the first Black woman to pass the bar in Kentucky and the first female prosecutor of any race in Louisville. The last line of the description Remington read from the picture is what sat with her. Jones' murder remains unsolved, right? This is pictures and news clippings from her at this time. For such a phenomenal woman who was ahead of her time, not only does she deserve justice for her murder, but she deserves the recognition of many things she did. She was a trailblazer, Remington added. She wanted to give Jones the recognition by writing a biography. Her research led to a connection with Jones's sister, Flora Shanklin. And this is her sister, Flora Shanklin, right here. The two were born 5 years and 9 months apart. But when it came to their bond, nothing could separate them. I could tell her anything, and she'd never judge me. I don't care what it was, because I could tell her, Shanklin recalled. Shanklin told the I-Team she could always talk to her sister until sadly she could not. I would get off from work, and something would happen on my job, and I say, let me go home. I tell her, then I would realize she wasn't there, and I would sit and cry, Shanklin said. Fighting tears, I knew she wasn't there for me to talk to anymore, and that was hard. That was the hard part. Recalling the night of the murder, Shanklin remembers her sister receiving a phone call from a friend who was facing a lawsuit and was asking Jones to come to her home. But because it was 10 at night, Jones told the friend there was nothing that could be done at that time. She did not want her friends who were less educated than her to think that she was above them, Shanklin said. So the friend said, since you've got this position, you've gotten so uppity. So the friend basically shamed her into leaving her house at 10 o'clock at night. Since you've got this position, you've become uppity that you don't even have any time for your friends. And Alberta said, okay, I'm coming. Jones wanted to prove her loyalty by going to her friend's house, but not before what proved to be an eerie final conversation with her sister. I left her on the couch reading a magazine, but Kennedy getting assassinated. And the last thing I said to her, which still hurts because she sat there and she said, I hope I don't get assassinated. And I said, you don't worry about it. You're not the president of the United States. That night, though, Jones was murdered. The person who identified her body was also a young lawyer at the time and shared an office with Jones on West Broadway, Kentucky State Representative Darrell Owens. It was the worst experience of my life, he said. Years later, after the case had been closed, Remington interviewed Jones' other colleagues and relatives. Then I got a copy of the case file, and that's when I realized it was more than just a book project, Remington said. In the file, Remington reviewed police reports which detailed witnesses who reported seeing a woman attacked and dragged near the Sherman-Minton Bridge. Also, the car Jones was driving was found on Dale Park Terrace, miles away from her body. A critical clue in the file, a copy of Remington provided to the I-team, was a Federal Bureau of Investigation report matching a fingerprint from the vehicle to a specific person. Investigators traveled to California to question the person whom the print belonged to. Remington also read a note from investigators which said the person was deceptive during a polygraph examination. WHAS 11 News is not identifying the person because they have never been charged. Despite the evidence, the investigators did not have enough to file charges. From my perspective, she was a person who didn't have any enemies, Owens recalls of his friends. She was very outgoing, very friendly. But let me see, I don't know if she ever met a stranger. In her quest to get the case reopened and reinvestigated, Remington found a letter from prosecutors to police, which stated virtually all of the detectives on the case were dead. However, Remington was able to track down one of the detectives who was still alive. He was a very young detective in 1965, and he had his way up. This is Dr. Lee Remington, by the way, the lady who's doing all the work to try to find this Alberta Jones's killer. He was a very young detective in 1965, and he had his way up to the top made his way up to the top very quickly. Remington said, "The problem is they don't get paid very much, and so he felt as though he couldn't support his family long term." The detective left the police force not long after the investigation started. Even now, 52 years later, I think sometimes I passed it up. I passed it, but I'm not, Shanklin said. She said that the wall of silence and passage of time are not a grant of immunity to anyone who is responsible for her sister's death. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, Shanklin said, reciting the Bible verse from the book of Romans. There will be a judgment day, and I have to continue to believe that what I've been taught in Sunday school and church, that you pay for what you did, and that I may never know, but the man above knows. All right, so that's trailblazer. She was a trailblazer in equal rights. Alberta Jones was a rising star in Louisville. People are not aware this phenomenal Black woman did all these things in the 50s and 60s. Bellarmine University professor Dr. Lee Remington, who was writing a biography on Jones, born in November 1930, Jones grew up in Louisville's West End and graduated from Central. All right, so we kind of went over this pretty much already. I want you guys to check out what her law partner has to say, Mr. Odell. This is the one that they actually had to come identify the body. If you guys appreciate what I'm doing here, make sure you hit the #1 button. Let me know you appreciate it. If you like what I'm doing, hit the thumb button. We got 34 people, 35 people in the chat room. We got 19 likes. Hey, you got to join. You want to be a member. You want to be able to talk about this. You got to join the. Join the membership if you want to be able to talk about this. So let's go ahead and get the video going, right? Real quick. Bam, bam, bam. There we go. All right, so let's check this video out. Fair use.
I got back in May and June. Alberta was killed in August.
Killed?
Yeah, it was a big deal because she was very prominent in this community. And they never found her killer. And I recall a call that morning. I used to have migraines. And I had a migraine either the day before or the day of. And I got a call on and said they couldn't find Alberta. Well, Alberta's a grown woman, that doesn't mean anything. So I went on into the office, and she was a prosecutor in domestic relations, what we call domestic relations court at that time. And they couldn't find her. And then later on that day, I don't know if you remember the name, Jesse Taylor. He was a policeman. They found her, and Jesse Taylor came by the office. He was a detective at that time and said, "I want you to go down and identify the body." I said, "Oh, Jesse, you know her. What I have to identify?" So I had to go down, and I guess at the time I heard death, Alberta was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. I think the theory is she was thrown off the bridge. They found her in the water. To be quite honest, I don't know how they killed her. I guess my initial thing was, they think I did it. I mean, your mind goes crazy. And so, Jesse was on the case. He spent days in the office going through the files, trying to figure if there was something there. And as a matter of fact, they had something on her case, I guess, within the last year or two. She was a dynamite. She was a great speaker. She was an orator. She was greatly involved in the African-American community. And
did anybody speculate as to whether it was a client? Because I've heard about this case.
Nobody knows. I mean, people speculate. I assume there's a lot of speculation. The reality is, in all of this time, they haven't solved it. I remember Denny Butler, who was now a legislator, retired from the police department. He worked on cold cases, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, when he called me and we talked about her. And, they was taking another look at it. And still don't have anything. They went through that, and it was a horrendous thing. I never forget identifying her by her hand was up like this. I mean, I never forget identifying. I couldn't understand. I still don't understand to this day. Jesse Taylor, who everybody, not everybody, but most folks in African American who just knew who Alberta was. Why I gotta go and identify her?
She wasn't married. She
wasn't married, no kids. She lived with her mom down on Virginia Avenue. And I recall going down to the house after they found her. Her mama and sister, you could hear them halfway up the block, just hollering, screaming. And what did you say? What did you say?
Well, that is a famous.
So I guess one of the things that my hope is that before I leave here, that somebody would figure out. Because the question is why? Who did it? They haven't been able to come up with that yet. So I'm hopeful that they will.
All right, so that's basically the story of that's her law partner, and this is that was Alberta Odell Jones's law partner. Again, she was a prosecutor in Kentucky, Howard University graduate. She was a civil rights activist. She was also a member of the NAACP. And her murder is still unsolved. Now, you got to ask yourself, first of all, let's acknowledge the fact that this was a dynamic young woman. Let's acknowledge the fact that she was the type of woman that had she been allowed to go forward in her life, she would have been amazing. I mean, but look at how they killed her. In this article, this Washington Post article says the prosecutor was pulled out of her rental car. And anybody who wants to come and talk about this, if you know anything, any of you guys, have you ever heard of this situation? Know anything about the death of, Miss Jones? If you know anything about this, let's talk about it. But the link is in the chat room. Anybody who wants to chop it up about this, let's do it. Maybe what we can do is we begin to, because this is our history. This is what our forefathers and foremothers had to go through. This is the strength. And I'm sure she understood the dangers that she was in. She even said it. I hope I don't get assassinated. But the bottom line is this is something that we need to talk about right here. You want to talk about this, let's talk about it. Let's know her name, right? Let's know the details of it. This is our history. This is an unsolved history of one of our own, one of that didn't have a chance to mature to greatness. But she was definitely on her way. So the prosecutor was pulled out of her rental car, beaten in the head with a brick until she lost consciousness, and thrown into the Ohio River where she drowned. The brutal August 5th, 1965 murder of Alberta O. Jones, a civil rights activist and the first woman to become a prosecutor in Louisville, was never solved. I wonder why that is, right? Despite fingerprints obtained from her car and witnesses who saw men tossing men, not just one man, but multiple men. So, you know, this was a setup. This wasn't, I mean, I'd almost be tempted to know who that friend was that guilt tripped her into coming out that night. But these men tossed her body from a bridge. You know, it doesn't indicate what color the men were, what they looked like, because things were so segregated in Louisville then. I believe if she had been a white woman prosecutor, they would have turned over heaven and hell to solve this, said Jones's sister Flora. And I'd have to believe that. Her sister Shanklin, his name Flora Shanklin, 81, still lives in Louisville, but she was black and they didn't do anything about it, right? They didn't do anything about it because, you know, because she was, you know, just another black woman in the mid-1960s. Shanklin doesn't want people to forget about Jones, a trailblazer who integrated the University of Louisville and worked as the first attorney for Muhammad Ali, and who was then Cassius Clay, negotiating the contract for his first fight. On Monday, a hometown heroes banner, this is the banner right here, honoring Jones, was unfurled in downtown Louisville, where she joined Ali, actress Jennifer Lawrence, and televised anchor Diane Sora, among others. Last year, Shanklin and Lee Remington, an associate professor of political science at Bellarmine University and pre-law program director, raised $8,000 to create the banner for Jones, which she now hangs from the side of the River City building, bank building. Remington has been intrigued by Alberta since 2001, when she was a first-year law student at Brandeis School of Law, the University of Louisville. In the hallway, you know, this is kind of a story. This is kind of sums up the story we talked about before. But listen, as a prosecutor, Jones worked in the domestic violence case, and she was putting white men in jail for beating their wives, right? So this is what white men were doing. They were beating their wives, right? Anything that has happened to black people, white guys did it to their wives first. I promise you. Just check the history. In 1965, when Jones became the first female prosecutor in Louisville, she gave an interview to the Louisville Courier-Journal. She was quoted as saying that after she returned home from law school, people told her, "You got 2 strikes against you. You're a woman and you're a Negro." Jones replied, "Yeah, but I've got 1 strike left. And I've seen people get home runs when all they got is one strike left." That tells you how tenacious this young sister was. You know, they telling her, "You got 2 strikes, but I got 1 strike left. I can still get." She was ready to play. You know, she was ready to do it and do big things. She had that attitude. So let's read that in context. As a prosecutor, Jones worked on domestic violence cases. She was putting white men in jail for beating their wives, Remington said. Where are all the white feminists at? This is what this woman is doing. That's why she had all these enemies. That's why these white men were angry with her. Only months after Jones began working as a prosecutor, she was killed. They couldn't have that. You know, she probably wasn't cutting no deals. She wasn't working with them. She wasn't paying any attention to what they were saying. Jones, who lived with her mother and sister, rarely went out at night. She knew she couldn't go out at night. Why? Because she knew what people were looking for. When I went upstairs about 10 to go to bed, she was sitting on the couch reading about the assassination of President Kennedy. Her sister Flora recalled in the interview. When Shanklin woke up the next morning, Jones was not in her bed. I went downstairs and asked my mother where Alberta was. She said, "I've been laying in bed the whole night wondering that." Jones, her mother, said, "I had received a call late that night from a friend named Gladys Wyckock, who asked Jones to meet her to talk about a lawsuit." So let's old Gladys was the one that got out of bed that night. Okay. Gladys, we need to talk to, I need to know what that conversation entailed. Jones told Wyckoff she was now working as a prosecutor and did not handle that kind of lawsuit. Gladys knew how to rattle her chain. Ain't that something? Your friends and your family always know how to get under your skin. That is what they are, professionals at that. And old Gladys knew how to rattle her chain, Shanklin recalled. Gladys told her, "Since you have this job you got all uppity. Don't y'all have friends like that? You done came up, you got a job, you in the NFL, you in the NBA. Oh, since you got all big and mighty, you don't come in the hood no more. You ain't down no more. And so what happened? This woman who very rarely goes out at night went out at 10 o'clock at night and ended up getting thrown over a bridge into the Ohio River because her damn friend Gladys, rattled her chain and had her coming out. Because Alberta was educated, she didn't want her friends to think she had gotten uppity. Jones decided to go out at night to meet Y. Cock, was interviewed repeatedly by police. She died this year. My mother asked, did she want her to go with her? Alberta said she would be okay. Shanklin said, and that was the last we heard from her. The next morning when Jones had not returned home, Shanklin called Wyckoff's house. Her daughter answered the phone and said, Mom downtown taking care of some business. No business was open at 7 o'clock in the morning in this city. So, we don't know where Miss Wyckoff was. All right. We don't know where she's at. All right. No business was open at 7 o'clock in the morning in the city. I said, Alberta came there that night and we haven't seen her. Gladys never called back. Shanklin said, so Gladys Wyckoff, what is this? Wyckoffs, that's her name, Wyckoffs. Gladys Wyckoffs never called back, fellas. So by 8:30, I called the safety director at the police department and said Alberta is missing. Jones was 34 at the time. The media speculated she was dumped off the bridge into the Ohio River, Remington said. Police believe her body was dumped off a boat. Drowned because she was unconscious. Her purse was found 3 years later hanging from the Sherman-Minton Bridge. Boy, so this is Flora Shanklin right here, the sister. And this is Professor Lee Remington to the right. That's the lady who's pushing this. And they unveiled the banner of Alberta at that center. For years, police told the family there was not enough evidence to arrest anyone. When Remington began her search in 2013, police told her witnesses in the case were dead. A friend of Jones's family gave Remington police records he had obtained from an open records request. In 10 minutes, I found 2 major discrepancies, Remington said in the records. They said all the detectives who worked on the case were dead, which was not true. She immediately located one of the detectives, Carl Corder, who had collected evidence in 1965. I called him. He was very much alive. He invited me to his house, Remington said. I got to sit down and interview him. He was a young detective at the time and had overseen much of the collection of evidence. In 2008, the FBI matched a fingerprint found inside of Jones's rental car to a man who was 17 years old at the time of the murder. A detective interviewed the man who submitted the polygraph test. The polygraph examination revealed that deception was indicated when the man was questioned regarding the circumstances surrounding the murder of Alberta Jones, according to the police report. But the prosecutor decided 2 years later he would not pursue the case, citing a loss of evidence and the deaths of investigators and other key evidence, which we know now is not true. Last year, Remington sent a letter to the chief of Louisville Metro Police Department requesting the department reopen the investigation. So let's go ahead and pull that information up right now. Shout out to my man Volcanus. Let's just Google that, right? Phone number, okay? Because this is the same place that Breonna Taylor got. That's the phone number for the Louisville Metro Police Department, fellas, ladies, anybody who's interested. All right. And what I suggest you all do is go ahead and make that call. There's a couple more phone numbers. And ask these people kindly, with the southernmost accent that you can, to request the department reopen this investigation, right? A tremendous amount of evidence was collected in the case. Fingerprints, vacuum samples from every inch of the car by the FBI, blood samples, her purse, all of its contents found 3 years later with credit cards and checks still inside. Her dentures, cigarette butts from the car, her shoes, her clothes, Remington wrote. Remington asked, the evidence is now missing. All that evidence is somehow missing. The evidence now missing, misplaced, lost, thrown away, destroyed. Where did it go? Right? Sergeant Josh Carr, who works in the Louisville Homicide Unit, said the case is still active, but we need to catch up with that. Homicides remain open until there's an arrest made or a clearance of some sort, Carr said in an interview with the Washington Post. Over 50 plus years, that case has been worked by multiple detectives. There are detectives who have worked tirelessly on the case. This is not closed. I sure would like to know who those detectives are, because after 50 years, it doesn't seem like they're working on it. But anybody who wants to join in and talk about this conversation, come on in. The link is in the chat room. I'd love to hear what you guys' input is. Who do you think did it? Who would be the first person you investigate? I'm looking for Gladys. I want to know who Gladys, what's happening? You call my sister, you call Miss Jones up and got her out the house. This is who I would want to talk to first if I was a police officer. I want to know everything she had to say. And I want to know all the list of all the folks that had anything to do with the investigation and where's the evidence. But anyway, these are sort of things that we as Black Americans need to take personal. This is a sort of investigation that we can do something about. Make them expend their resources, make them do what law enforcement is supposed to do. Make them do their job. Shout out to Volcanoes. Thank you so much for the $20 super chat. And, but let's not forget, Attorney Jones. Let's not forget her. Let's not forget Alberta Odell Jones. She was helping. She was one of us. She was a civil rights leader. She was the type of strong Black woman we should know. Okay. She clearly was, she was hardworking. She was classy. She was dedicated. She was clearly a good friend. This is the type of woman these are the type of Black women we need to uplift. These are the type of memories that need not be forgotten. This type of sister right here. This is beautiful right here. This woman could have been your grandmother, she could have been your mother, this is the type of woman that we want to uplift. These are the type of sisters that we want to remember always and think of as we go about our day and be motivated by, because at the end of the day, she was definitely making change. So we'll have to follow up with this story, but for those of you who like these sort of things and you appreciate these sort of stories, this is a break from the Quavos and other pop culture stuff that we do here, and even the history, the African history. This is clearly African American history, recent African American history. And if you appreciate what I'm doing, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button. But other than that, thank you guys. I appreciate it. We won't belabor the point, but remember her name, Alberta Odell Jones. Remember her name, family. Alberta Odell Jones, Louisville, Kentucky, first female Black prosecutor, killed in 1965 at 34 years old. She was also a civil rights pioneer. This is another bit of Black history, man. As far as I'm concerned, Black's history is something. It's not a month. It's not an event. It's a life. It's a life ongoing process in life to learn as much about yourself so that you can pass it down, so that you can become a better person. And this is part of our history. But either way, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the contribution. Thank you guys. I hope you are motivated. I hope we can pick up where she left off. I hope some of you young Black girls who are listening to this, I hope you're motivated by her sheer spunkiness, by her tenacity. They say you got 2 strikes against you. You a woman and, you're a woman and you're Black. He said, but I got 1 strike left and I can hit a home run with that. Now that's spunky right there. That's what you talking about. That's what I want to hear. That's the type of lawyer you want. This is the woman that Muhammad Ali chose as his first lawyer, right? Attorney Jones. That was his first lawyer right there. So you gotta love that. That lets you know that if the greatest of all time chose it, she must have been a winner, man. So, my condolences to the family, but we know we're here. And this is a beautiful thing to be able to talk about in history. We got one person in here. Salam, how you doing today?
Hey, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
I'm good, man. What would you like to add to this conversation about attorney Alberta Odell Jones?
I like it's sometimes it's kind of sad that people don't want to see you grow and they always want to pull you back.
Oh, you
That's
talking
what I
about
got.
her friend with the friend Gladys?
Yeah, but it speaks to a broader conversation, which is when you go forward in your as far as personal development or growth, whether it's in whatever field you're in, people always feel like you have to dumb down to accommodate them, because they're scared to challenge themselves
Yeah,
and grow.
and I mean, are you referring to her friend Gladys saying you've gotten all uppity now since you got that new job and coaxed her out of the house? What do you think about that?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, and we don't have the facts in front of us, but the fact that Gladys called her over to the house, right, and then got her out the house and got her over there. And then when the family called her the next day at 7 o'clock in the morning, her daughter says she downtown handling business. I mean, I don't know. I'm just, but that would be one of the first people I'd want to talk to over and over again, right? Because it sounds kind of interesting to me, and I think that's something that the Louisville Police Department should look at. And as I said, family, the telephone number to the Louisville Metro Police Department is 502-574-7111. And you as the public have a right to ask about the investigation of Alberta Odell Jones and how it's going. You see, you can use your phones. All of y'all got cell phones, especially everybody that's watching this. So this is the work that you can do. Y'all can be some armchair civil rights activists on y'all way to work tomorrow by hitting that phone number. But Salam, what else do you have to add to the conversation, sir?
No, nothing much. I just that point just really hit me as far as saying, "Oh, you're too good for us," and that kind of thing. Because
isn't that always though? Like, I know guys that they end up in trouble. They get that NBA contract. They get that they get that new job working at that bank downtown, and their homies want to come over and have them smoke weed, and then they got a surprise P test the next day, trying to be down. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Isn't that terrible? I've seen that. So you lose your good job, or you get kicked out of school, or you get kicked off the team, because you trying to stay down with the homies. What do you think about that, Salam? What's the answer to that?
Hey, we're in an intercultural battle. I think we've been in it for a long time. But what it is the intellectuals in the quote unquote Black American community, they don't want to separate from the this is going to be a hard truth to say, but we have a large amount of ignorant Blacks that don't want to evolve within the Black America. So
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, finish your thought, because I want to add on to that. Go ahead.
So we the ignorant Blacks. It seems like the intellectuals kind of cater to the intellectual the ignorant Blacks to be kind of they dumb down to a certain level and accommodate them, because the ignorant Blacks to a larger degree run the Black American culture. They run the Black American culture. They dictate who is quote unquote Black, who is not, and to fit in, the intellectual Blacks have to kind of dumb down or regress to accommodate and to save their, to keep their Blackness, their Black card. So
when did that happen?
I don't know. I'm not that. I don't have that much years on me. But I would say, now this is from what I know. I think that things started getting shifty around the '60s, around integration.
Okay.
And ironically, that's when things started going bad with the families, and that's when they did the act where they pushed for the welfare and all that stuff. So
why do you think it happened?
I'm sorry.
Why do you think it happened?
Why do I think the cultural war happened?
Yeah. But
I think
you refer to it as a culture war. I'm just asking questions, Scott. I want to share with you when you finish, get to your end there. Go ahead.
okay. I think it happened because the black, to me, black is not necessarily a race. It's a political block at this point. And so to be black today is to be liberal, is to be married to be Christian, married to the Democratic Party, and if you don't go with that agenda, and to be like, you know, the other elements of blackness, you know, to the Tyler Perry stuff, if there's a certain identity of what black is today, and if you're not into that, then you're kind of, for example, I'm a Republican, I'm conservative. I won't say I'm Republican, but I will say I'm conservative, politically conservative, and socially and politically conservative. So most of what's going on in Black America, I don't really relate to. I really don't relate to a lot of it. The thinking.
Are you are you Black American? Are you West Indian, Caribbean? What are you? African? What are you?
I'm foundational American.
Okay. All right. So
right.
you refer to yourself as a conservative. So are you familiar with this gentleman Thomas Sowell? Or Sowell?
Right. I heard of him.
All right. So I don't consider myself a conservative or liberal or any of that. I just do what's in the best interest of Black folks. But he wrote this book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And basically what he's saying is that Black rednecks kind of took over the Black culture. There was a time when, you know, we were classy, you know, but at some point, the hood, the ghetto behavior began to become synonymous with Blackness. And so that's why basically the ghetto people took over Blackness. And so now when we celebrate Blackness, it's usually some of the worst elements or lowest class elements in our groups. And so most other races, they separate from the hood people. You know, you ever heard that old saying, you got folks that live in the Appalachian Mountains, you know, white folks, they got folks living in the Appalachian Mountains that they never see. You feel what I mean? And the reason they never see them is because they don't associate with them, family or not. There's a class issue, but unfortunately, the lower classes dominate the culture of the upper classes of Black people. So now we are beholden to the hood element, if that makes sense. You understand what I'm saying? And so we feel beholden, and so we can never quite leave. That's why you have so much class mixing. It's also the reason why there is so much tension between Black men and Black women. A lot of brothers have entered into the middle class to the tune of 64%. And so their value systems are changing. And so they're looking around and they like, I don't want a twerking hood rat type chick, but damn, most of these women, even the ones that are educated, they got some of that hood rat in them because they got hood rat friends and they don't separate themselves. There's no barrier. You know, you might end up dealing with a woman who she might be, you know, educated and classy, and it usually works like this, but her baby daddy is a jailbird or a hood rat type, Pookie Ray Ray type guy. You see what I'm saying? And you like, you know, I don't want to deal with that. And so we can never quite arrive. They bundle us all in the same group. And so is that kind of what you've noticed, Salam?
Yeah, but you know, it's funny though. I kind of have I have this personal struggle myself as I'm speaking on it. I still have that wanted to relate to certain guys. You know,
want to be down. Backwards. You want to be down.
Yeah, I do have that. And
so how do you deal with that? Because see, had our lovely sister Alberta Odell Jones said, look, girl, I ain't coming over there. It's 10 o'clock at night. You know, all these people looking for me. I've been putting white men in jail for about a year now. You kidding me? I got too many enemies out there. Girl, you better wait. But she couldn't do it because she felt compelled to go out there and stay down. How many Black brothers do you know? They got that college scholarship, and then they go home for Christmas and they end up getting caught up or get shot because they hanging out at the club with the homies. You see what I mean? How many chicks that we know, good girls, sweet girls, they get called out. Oh, you soft, you weak, you a punk, blah blah blah. Girls, right? And they end up getting their faces scratched up or sliced up, trying to act tough because they hanging out with hood rats. That they knowing that they soft as a cotton swab, but they out there hanging out with them hardened hood rats. So it's a problem, you know. It's a problem, you know. So how do you deal with it? Because you said you faced it. And those of you all who appreciate this conversation, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. And thank you. I want to acknowledge people: Arcanus, Stacey Adams, W. Alfonso, Damon J. Thank you so much for the contribution. How do you deal with that, Salam? You sound like you're a lot younger than me. How do you deal with it?
Well, I had to leave where I was from and start all over. You know what I mean? And just
what's been the repercussions of that, having to leave those people? What do they say about you now, Salam?
Yeah, there was scrutiny at first, and then, you know, eventually people got used to it. And you know, like, for example, my speech changed. You know, I made a cognizant effort to stop saying the N-word, to stop just a lot of stuff that I used to, a lot of the way I used to speak. I had to kind of change my direction, because when I wanted to get in business, I didn't know how to articulate myself when I was in business settings. And so I had to kind of learn how to speak without saying certain things. You know what I mean? So that was that was the struggle. So go ahead.
No, man. Go ahead, man. That's called code switching, by the way. That's called code switching. But go ahead. When you go from speaking ebony phonics or ebony sounds or ebonics or black sound, whatever they call it now, to speaking a more standard form of the English language is code switch. Now, some people will say back in the 60s and 70s, they'll say you talking white. They'll say you talking like a white man, and they'll shame you for that. You know, so how did you deal with that? I mean, surely you do interact with your old friends and family at this point, right? Do you still do that, or you just hell with it?
To a way lesser degree, but I dabble, but I always, you know, the fire always gets a little hot. You can always tell when the fire is getting a little hot, and then you pull back. You know, what situation? Okay, when you went there, you were like, oh no, I got to get out of here. Is there something that happened, at least name one occasion where you got there, you like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to get caught up hanging around here. The name a situation for us, if you have something you can explain to I see this thing. I always see where things can get tricky. So I see when my old boys are on the conversations. You know, if they shooting dice, you know, you got guys that's in their 30s shooting dice at the park at night. I already know not to go over there. So, you know, stuff like that. Like,
you know, in my book, I explained that there's, you know, it's around here somewhere. Basically, you have to escape hell, because as long as you in hell, you're gonna have to deal with them devils and demons. You got to get out of there. There's no way you can go and walk through hell and live in hell and not get burnt. You see what I'm saying? So you literally have to physically remove yourself from that environment. Otherwise, you're gonna get caught up, man. And this is the reason why I left South Central Los Angeles back in 1992, fresh out of the riots. I was gonna get caught up. I got friends that were doing good for themselves, doing well for them. They got caught up too, shot, killed, put in jail. You know, some places trouble is looking for you. You know how you say, well, I'm not looking for trouble. Trouble is in the car, tracking you down, you know, looking for you. You see, that's just the reality of some places, and you just have to leave that. We don't want to, you know, lose track of the fact that we're talking about Sister Alberta Odell Jones, but my God, it looks like trouble was looking for her. It was almost like it was bound to happen. She's putting, I mean, you know, think about it. See, a lot of people, they got these white guys, these lovely ladies of ours, they put these white gentlemen up on these pedestals as if, you know, they're saints. You see what I mean? But they don't realize that those white men there was a reason feminism happened. There was a reason white women wanted the right to vote and wanted the right to own their own land. We talked about how white women before 1865, it's like the reason that they were happy to have their own property, i.e. their slaves, is because they would farm their slaves out for work, get that money, and use that money to prepare for a divorce. Those white men were giving those white women hell back in those days. They were tyrants. They treated the black slaves bad, and they treated those white women bad. That's why they like, y'all gonna give them the right to vote for us. Y'all dogging us out. You see what I'm saying? And so this, what did you hear the story said? Alberta Jones was putting white men in jail for beating their wives. And this is in 1965. This was something that was common. This was, you could beat, that was part of the culture back then. It was part of the law. And how dare this young Negro put us in jail for doing something we've been, how dare we beat her? That's how they were looking at it. So you see how they had an extra, they felt that their primacy over their house was being invaded upon by a black woman, no less. So you see how egos got involved. You see why she was a target like that, man.
Right. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, man. But yeah, so I think we want to make sure we remember Sister Alberta Jones. You know, they always talk about say her name, say her. See, this is not a woman who was out in the middle of the street fighting and got killed by the police. You see, this is a woman that was fighting for us as a people. This is a woman that was doing her job. You see what I mean? She had done no wrong. You see, she was doing what she was supposed to do. There is no other side. Well, what did she do? She didn't do nothing but what she was supposed to do. She was 100% in the right. There is no arguing that Alberta Odell Jones should have been left alone. You see, but she wasn't. So this is one of those things that I don't want to hear the other side. There ain't no other side. She needs to be vindicated. She needs justice. Her killers need to put in jail, and we need answers for what happened to attorney Alberta Odell Jones. These are the type of people we need to stand behind. You know, you just brought up, man, let me tell you something, man. I'm going to be on Fox News tomorrow. And the reason I'm going to be on Fox News tomorrow is because recently there was a shooting here in Houston, Texas. Some young ladies were fighting in the street. A young brother stepped in the circle to try to break them up. Then he backed up out of it. And then one of the young ladies said, hey, he pushed me. He pushed me. And so another individual who we don't know shot him a bunch of times, and then he laid out in the street over here in South Park, Houston, Texas. Just like that. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean?
Right.
That's how quickly you can lose your life as a black man in the United States. That's how quickly you can lose your life as a black person in the United States. Why? Why? Because that ghetto culture has taken over. That the ghetto culture is pervasive. You know, you got women who are willing to lie. You got men who are willing to overreact. It's crazy. It's all crazy, man. So it's something to be. I'm glad you brought that up and you cued in on that. A lot of people get pumped up and amped up, come stay down. That whole clannish mentality comes in. You understand what I'm saying, brother?
Yeah, so, I understand completely. Yeah,
man. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. What else you want to say before we go on to the next thing here?
Not much, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Salam. You have a wonderful evening. All right, everybody. I'd like to thank Salam and everybody who's contributed to the Cash App, the PayPal, and the Super Chat. Again, as I said before, I want you guys to remember her name. Her name was Alberta Odell Jones. I'm going to take the time to put her name on the screen so it will pop up. You guys remember her name, Alberta Odell Jones. She died in 1965 in Louisville, Kentucky. We'll take a moment of silence for her. And then we'll end the show. But in the meantime, I want to thank everybody for the time you spent. God bless you all. I love you. This is Uncle D, and I'm out.